finishing up an interview. Hello, this is Harold Meyerson, editor-at-large of the American Prospect. Actually, the guy who's at large right now is David Dayen, our executive editor, who will join us momentarily. He is not being, bound and struggling to get out. He is just finishing an interview since, in addition to our doing these weekly broadcast or whatever we call them, we also are working on various projects. But I will tell you that one of the things we will be discussing is a rarity in American history, and that is actually a fairly terrific week for American workers, which is not something that happens all that often in American history. Indeed, it's been a pretty dismal run for more or less the last 50 years, but the last, 7 days, beginning with the auto workers unionization by a 3-to-1 vote of the first auto factory in the South since forever, it has been followed up by all kinds of terrific changes at regulatory agencies which are headed by the appointees of President Biden. We'll also be talking about the Supreme Court's week, which is a less rosy picture, including the discussion yesterday, which makes pretty clear that the court has the 6 conservatives, the 6 right-wingers, the 6 Republicans, I think more precisely defined on the court, are going to ensure that Donald Trump's trial for trying to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election will not take place before people go to vote in the 2024 presidential election, which is a rather politically significant development, which I referred to in my on-tap posting yesterday as son of Bush v. Gore. I think that we may discuss what's going on college campuses right now. I'm sort of an inadvertent veteran of this, having been at Columbia in 1968 as a freshman, and also in Chicago for the Democratic Convention that year. So if the FBI indeed was tracking people who showed up at multiple disruptions, I am somewhere on their list. All right, let's see. I guess I can start as a solo. Beginning with what happened 7 days ago, or is it 8 days ago, last Friday, when the UAW had a magnificent 3-to-1 victory with 85% of the eligible workers at the Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga, Tennessee, actually voting, which is a much higher rate, you will note, than Americans vote in actual political elections. So clearly, this was a very successful organizing drive, and it stands in very sharp contrast to the UAW's 2 previous efforts, both of which lost narrowly to organize the same Volkswagen plant. In this election, as in the 2 previous elections, the main opposition came less from the company, which is actually bound by German law to have a little more than half of its board of director members coming either from the government of the German state where they're headquartered, or the workers themselves. Hello, David.
Here, I'm sorry for the delay.
That's okay. I've been
It's slow.
the vaudeville term is vamp till ready. So
Well,
that's what I've been doing, and I was beginning to talk about the Workers' Week with Volkswagen,
Yeah.
thought we could go on to everything else that happened over the week, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned in a piece just this week, Variety has Oscar season, and Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal have earnings report season, and we have rules that are getting done quickly at the end of a presidential term because of the Congressional Review Act season.
Which
We
is
can
more of a
explain what I
mouthful. Yeah.
mean. You can explain what I mean by that, but what I'm sure people who follow the Prospect or are listening to this, by the way, hello everybody, welcome to the Prospect Weekly Roundup. Harold Meyerson, David Dayen. Uh, I'm sure people who actually pay attention to us know there have been a lot of things going on in federal agencies. What you're talking about with the Workers' Week, adds to that some, similarly timed, but not necessarily for the same reason, kind of events like the successful vote last Friday evening at Volkswagen. But from the perspective of agency rules, they're under the gun to get a lot of things done in the next month. And we're seeing literally every day multiple announcements from agencies on really important rules that they've been working on pretty much through the entirety of the first term. And, to quickly explain why, and we had a great piece from one of our interns, Gerard Edick, on this week. There's a thing called the Congressional Review Act of 1996. It stipulates that Congress can disapprove of a rule that is passed within 60 legislative days of that rule being put into the Federal Register. Obviously, Joe Biden is not going to sign a Congressional Review Act resolution getting rid of one of his own rules, but this comes into play when there's a change in power. And if you're within that 60-day legislative day deadline, you get 60 days in the next Congress to go ahead and try to disapprove of that rule and get it kicked out. And then you can't actually make any rulemaking substantially similar to that without sanction by Congress. So it's a very powerful law. And because the Obama administration didn't pay attention to this as much, the Trump first term kicked out about 15 rules this way.
And
And
if we want to go back to when this law was enacted in
it was under
1996,
Gingrich. Yeah.
that was when Bill Clinton was president, but it was the first time the Republicans had controlled the House, in this case under Speaker Newt Gingrich, in 40 years, and the Senate. So they wanted to put in place legislation that would enable them, assuming they kept control of Congress, to axe any good
That's right.
rules or regulations passed under Bill Clinton.
It was a way to shift the balance of power to the congressional from the executive branch.
Right.
And it wasn't used very much at all in the first 20 years until Donald Trump kind of and the Republicans in Congress kind of cracked the code. And so now everyone's hyper aware of this thing, right? And 60 legislative days, that's not 2 months. Congress doesn't come to work a whole lot. So the expectation is that 60 legislative dates, the window would close in late May of this year, which means for months after that, if you finalize a rule put in the Federal Register, Congress, the next Congress, if it flips to the Republicans, and if Donald Trump becomes president, they could use this policy.
Yeah, this 60 days is a little like the last 5 minutes of a close football game, which can take half an hour.
Exactly.
So that's pretty much what it means.
The point of all this is that this has sped up the rulemaking process at the end of the term here, because they don't want any midnight regulations that then would be susceptible to overturning. It really, I mean, even with this hyper awareness, it kind of means the last several months of your presidency is dormant from a regulatory perspective, and that's not a great thing. So, I mean, I think that the Congressional Review Act has a power, even if it's not used, because it's speeding them up, and ultimately some of those some of those agencies won't make the deadline. And so I think there's an importance to it, even if we're seeing this flurry.
And why it really matters is because Joe Biden has made the most progressive, and in this case, progressive for workers, appointments to his regulatory agencies than we've probably ever seen, with the possible exception of Franklin Roosevelt's administration. And they have had one terrific week.
They've had a hell of a week, and now let's get into what they've
Right.
done this week. So you were talking about VW, and let's just put a pin in that, because that doesn't really implicate this agency.
Right, although there were through two other worker-related developments that actually begin with workers, which I do want to discuss. But
Exactly.
let's
Go into those. So why don't you start? Go ahead.
Well, beyond VW finally busting through the Mason-Dixon line and beginning to unionize the Deep South, which has been historically just up in arms, once upon a time, literally, about, quote, Northern values and eroding Southern values, which is what 6 Republican governors of from the Deep South put in a message to try to convince at the last minute the Volkswagen workers not to vote for the union. As I noted in a piece I wrote, that particular passage could have been taken from Jefferson Davis or Don C. Calhoun, you know.
Right.
So besides that, we have also this week the first bargaining session between the Starbucks baristas and the company, and they put out an announcement that, you know, things went well. So that was you know, a real breakthrough, because Starbucks had been adamantly opposed, you will recall, to the unionization of its various outlets, and about 350 by now have voted to go union. And
if there is an actual agreement on a store template, if you will, for these, you know, a model contract, basically, you're going to see 10,000 Starbucks go union.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at that point, there would be no reason on earth why a barista in a non-union facility wouldn't vote to essentially get them
So that's
what the contract would stipulate.
If you think of that as a unit, I mean, I don't have the exact number off the top of my head of Starbucks workers, but if you think of that as a company, a unionized company, it'd be one of the biggest unionized companies in the country.
Yeah, no, I would think there are 9,000 Starbucks outlets that the company itself owns. There are another 7,000 that are franchises, which is a more complicated issue. But, you know, if you have 9,000 Starbucks outlets that are unionized, you probably have 200,000 union members all of a sudden.
I mean, I other than UPS, or I'm trying to think of the companies of that size that have that many unionized workers. You can't think of many.
No. UPS is number one, and for all we know, Starbucks may end up being number 2.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then also the administration announced a grant for solar production, I think in upstate New York. And they really leaned on the company which got the grant, Micron.
I believe it's a semiconductor. This is
semiconductor, right?
This was a chips grant.
You know, be unionized, and the Communication Workers of America, CWA, is apparently already in talks with Micron about that. So that would be a huge development too. So that's
right.
Workers as workers during the week, which is pretty damn good in and of itself. But the regulatory agencies have been really having an extraordinary week too. So David, you want to
just briefly on the Micron thing, they're trying to put a labor peace agreement together, essentially, with CWA. But there's another union that's also involved up there that I want to mention. That's the American Federation for Teachers, which has put together an apprenticeship program through area high schools in upstate New York. I believe the curriculum starts this fall. And that is intending to be a pipeline to what now could very well and probably will be union jobs. So you have a union working with the company on an apprenticeship program in high schools, moving students onto a unionized job. I mean, that's in America, I don't know that there's an example of such a thing.
Right, right. And these are two of the
Certainly there are
most,
apprenticeship programs, but through a public high school in conjunction with
yeah.
the company.
Yeah, and these are two of the most strategically savvy unions in the country, the Communication Workers and the American Federation of Teachers. So they're both, in this case, they're both very on the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, let's go to the regulatory stuff because we did this whole spiel on the Congressional Review Act. Now, here's the results. Here's what's happened. So, if we want to keep with workers, the biggest thing that happened for workers on a regulatory standpoint is the Federal Trade Commission finalizing on Tuesday its non-compete ban. Ban on non-compete agreements, which are these clauses in employment contracts that essentially tell a worker that they cannot, for a period of time, sometimes 2 years, sometimes less, to work in the same field for a competitor, for a competing firm. And while this initiated with senior executives and people who had access to trade secrets, we are now seeing non-competes in a whole host of businesses across the economy. And I'm talking about fast food clerks. I'm talking about janitors. I'm talking about hairdressers. I'm talking about people who have really no access to competitively sensitive information.
Right. And the FTC said that there were 30 million American workers who were subject to these non-competes. And it's obvious, to put it mildly, that there are not 30 million American workers who have valuable trade secrets.
Right. And this is clearly done as a wage suppression tactic. In fact, the estimate from the FTC is that this will lead to $300 billion a year in wage increases for people who have, the freedom, the flexibility to move to another job and therefore bargain with their existing job to make sure they don't. So this is a huge deal for a couple of reasons. Number one, obviously, all of the things we just said in terms of what it would mean for workers to have that economic liberty. The second thing is that this was conducted under rulemaking authority that the FTC has, or at least says they have, and we'll get into that in a second, with to make rules on unfair methods of competition. And that is Section 5 of the FTC Act. And if they are allowed to do this, and within hours of putting this rule together, there was a lawsuit that was slapped on the FTC, predictably in Texas, where there are a lot of right-wing judges. The very first lawsuit was by a company called Ryan. It's a business tax company, services company, where the head of the company advised Trump on taxes in 2016, and the company gave close to $300,000 to the Trump inauguration. They hired the lawyer Eugene Scalia, who is Antonin's son and was the labor secretary under Donald Trump. And they did it in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, where there are right-wing judges willing to overturn any number of laws as long as Democrats promulgate them. So
I want to add a footnote on Eugene Scalia. When he was Secretary of Labor, he refused to authorize OSHA to investigate workplaces while COVID was raging,
right.
which was not a great move for public health, to put it gently. So
Absolutely.
that's who's involved here.
That's who we're dealing with. And
Yeah.
then the next day there was another lawsuit by the Chamber of Commerce in a different part of Texas. What these lawsuits are saying is the FTC actually doesn't have that rulemaking authority. They claim it's merely procedural, it's not substantive. Then they say in the same breath, even if they do have that authority, it's unconstitutional. It's a delegation of legislative authority to an executive branch, and it's a major questions doctrine issue because this would be so sweeping, and you can't, basically a Democrat can't do that. Basically,
Yeah, well, actually, if this came
right.
to a vote in Congress, I don't think this would be politically very helpful to the Republicans, to put it mildly.
No,
Uh,
and every Republican who's getting support from the Chamber of Commerce, or even not, should be asked about this. I mean, there actually are non-compete bans that have been introduced into Congress on a bipartisan basis. Matt Gaetz, of all people, once again labeled himself a conservative this week because of Lena Khan, the head of the FTC, in his support of the non-compete ban. The few senators as well have signed on to a bill to ban all non-competes. So yeah, this splits the Republican coalition, whereas the Democratic coalition is foursquare for it.
yeah,
So I hope that this becomes more of a political issue.
I should note,
Very good.
there are some states that have banned non-competes, and in California, actually, this dates from the 19th century, and I honestly don't know what was going on in the California economy in the middle late 19th century that led to it. But it is the case that with a ban on non-competes, you have seen the rise of Silicon Valley, where very talented software programmers and others break off to form their own companies and have created really the 20th century, 21st century world we live on. So that's one of the
Right. Which
without getting
completely
into the
puts
various merits of social media and things like that. That's one
that
of the benefits
completely
of banning non-competes.
completely puts the lie to this idea that actually non-competes are good for workers and they lower wages. These are the arguments that are being made by these various lawsuits. Just look to California, where we have this huge high wage sector that is driven really by the fact that workers have this freedom to move from one place to another. So that was one of them that went down this week from a regulatory standpoint. Another one that got a lot of attention was from the Department of Transportation. I did a piece about this week, which basically said that if your flight is canceled or if it is delayed by a long period of time, or if you paid for services that you didn't get, like your bags didn't show up, or you paid for the Wi-Fi and it never worked throughout the flight, you will be eligible for automatic cash refunds within 7 business days. And right now, the situation is if your flight is canceled, you have to ask, you have to go to a website if you want to get restitution. Often it's given in the form of a travel voucher, so it's not really a cash instrument. It doesn't help you rebook because it's with the same airline that you ended up losing your flight from. And so this is a really robust new kind of version that says, the consumer doesn't have to do anything. You will just get this automatically if your flight was canceled or heavily delayed, or the other options, and it'll be credited to your credit card, and that's it. The other part of this rule that the Department of Transportation did also is around junk fees, hidden fees, and it says that companies have to be completely transparent with baggage fees, with change fees, with cancellation fees, all of those things. And this is an example, I think, of when Elizabeth Warren kind of put forward her philosophy. One of the biggest things was this idea that personnel is policy, that who is in those positions of rulemaking power within the various cabinet agencies really, really matters. And I don't think that the allies of Elizabeth Warren necessarily had Pete Buttigieg in mind when they put forward this philosophy. And indeed, Secretary Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, was pilloried at the beginning of the Biden administration because there were mass cancellations throughout. This was mostly in 2022 in the summer. And then around Christmas, Southwest had a meltdown. Thousands of flights, tens of thousands of flights were canceled, and people weren't getting the fair shake, the restitution that they thought they deserved. And Buttigieg, was criticized very heavily for this, but he really kind of listened to that criticism and got much tougher on the airlines around these issues. 2023 was the lowest percentage of canceled flights in over a decade. He imposed on Southwest for that 2022 meltdown the largest fine in the Department of Transportation's history, and now he has created this system whereby the restitution is automatic. So yes, personnel is policy, but also you can teach personnel how to do good policy. You can actually get some results. And especially if you set up sort of a roadmap for this is what politics ought to be about, and this is how things can go, and you will be rewarded for that approach, that you can really make changes.
Yeah, this is the secular equivalent of getting religion, and we're for that. Another really big change came out of the Department of Labor this week,
Yes.
and that was the extension of overtime regulations to about 4 million Americans who are earning over the threshold for qualification for that, but weren't getting it. I mean, when
Right.
overtime was created way back in the 1930s, it was estimated that it covered 63%
Right.
of American workers. And right now, I think it covers somewhere in single digits
Right.
percent of
So I think the
Americans.
increase was to something like $50,000 a year. You will now be eligible for
I
overtime.
think it's like 56, actually,
Yeah.
$56,000 a year.
That's
If
significant. That takes in the median worker and below. So it's probably
Yeah,
about
yeah, and there's a lot of, I mean, it also takes in a class of like mid-level managers, the people who
right,
actually manage the Starbucks we were talking about
right,
earlier,
right.
who are now, I mean, it's not like they were, and a lot of them, have to work way more than 40 hours a week, but they
Yeah,
weren't getting any overtime pay because this threshold originally was set at, like decades ago at 20,000 something. You couldn't earn over that. And, finally, we see the administration agency, in this case, the Department of Labor, raising that to
yeah.
56,000. This has been an issue before
Hmm.
in the Obama administration, but it was rolled back.
Yeah, this is a yo-yo.
Yeah, this is a yo-yo.
Democratic and Republican administrations. Another one that's like that the Department of Labor also finalized this week was their what they call the fiduciary rule, which says that investment advisors in 401k plans have to operate in the best interest of their clients. What a revelation! They actually have to work in the best interest of their clients. And this is another one that has been highly contested, going all the way back to the Obama administration. And that was finalized this week. Net neutrality laws were actually safeguards were put into place by the FCC this week. That was another one that kind of ping-ponged from the Obama to Trump to Biden administrations, and it shows that these things aren't ironclad; they can go back and forth. But if you do them before that Congressional Review Act deadline, it takes a number of years to pass a rule, to go
And
through the research, the notice and comment period, and then get it done. And in those few years, people are protected. So
one more rule
there's
that
a
got
lot more.
made under the deadline is staffing requirements at nursing homes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Again, you can't imagine anything that would be uh,
Right.
less helpful than having no staffing requirements at nursing homes. But this was promulgated this week too, and it means basically that there will be more staff at nursing homes to take care
Yeah,
of the
I saw a
patients there.
Family Foundation report that showed that if this rule were in place right this second, only about 20% of nursing homes would comply with it. So most nursing homes are going to have to staff up significantly more, and that's obviously not just great for nurses who are not going to be as overworked and overtaxed, but much better for the residents who are actually going to have the help that they need in these nursing homes. So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying also, you look at the industries that have been targeted this week, airlines, nursing homes. These are industries that are building up tons of ill will among the public for a very long time. And, people rightly say at some point, well, where's the government? Can't we do something about it? This week, the government did something about it.
Yeah, and it's it's contagious, right? I mean, you see what this was kind of the impetus behind the Biden administration's Competition Council. So they put together this thing and invited all the agencies to participate, and said that we want a whole of government approach on these sort of corporate power issues. And basically, every few months they have this meeting where everyone has to come to the teacher's office, and they better have an apple for the teacher, right? I mean, they kind of have set up this structure whereby these agencies feel like, well, we got to get something done. We have to have something to say at this meeting for the Competition Council. And it's created like this incredible kind of energy within the government to get these rules done, find whatever powers they need to find in order to move forward on these administration priorities. I'll give you an example. This is like a year ago, but it's one of my favorite examples. There's this stuff that is called fire retardant that you spray over wildfires to try to suppress them. And it turns out there's an accreditation agency. There's the National Forest Service has this accrediting structure whereby they say, okay, this is a good fire retardant. And for many years, there was only one company that satisfied that eligibility, and therefore only one fire retardant in the world. And because other countries used the US accreditation standard. So there was one company, it was called Perimeter Solutions, that had 100% monopoly over this particular quirky industry that cities and states purchase this fire retardant to stop wildfires in their communities. And they were raising the price significantly. They were very happy with the arrangement of being the only accredited fire retardant company. Well, during this process of the Biden competition order, somebody at the U.S. Forestry Service said, well, why don't we accredit some other company so that there's some competition in these markets? And they did. They added a new entrant to that accreditation, and now there's actual competition in these markets. And it's just like a tiny thing, but somebody in government said, here's something I can do to contribute to this effort, and I'm going to do it. And they got it done. So it's yeah, go ahead.
Well, I want to pull back to a little bigger picture. What this signals is Joe Biden understanding, in a broad sense, a couple of things. That the Democratic Party base has become more progressive over the past couple decades, and that led to his setting up committees during the transition with his people, but also Bernie Sanders' people and Elizabeth Warren's people, to really ended up staffing these agencies with people who I don't think would have necessarily been appointed under Clinton or Obama or Jimmy Carter. It's a
And
different crew.
even those that were the standard, as we said with Pete Buttigieg, even those that were kind of the
Yeah,
standard appointees that you'd expect, they learned. They had the courage to sort of
right.
learn from the way the administration agenda was being set, and also, the circumstances of the particular agencies or particular industries that they regulated, that it would be good practice to align
Right.
with these other agencies. So
So that's one of the two overriding I think causes here. And the other is maybe a subset of that, is a particular awareness that the Democrats really needed to move past the neoliberal belief that markets do best, and that, you know, the government really needed to intervene on behalf of American workers. One of Joe Biden's leading economic aides told me at some point over the last year that there's this famous chart produced by the Economic Policy Institute decades ago in the early 1990s that shows in the first 3 decades after World War II, the rate of productivity gains and the rate of average wages rose absolutely in tandem. I mean, like one rose by 98% and one rose by 97% over a 3 decade period. But starting in the mid 70s, they begin to diverge. You're getting the visual image here. This is why this is excitingly visual.
Very podcast.
They started to diverge widely. And Joe Biden actually has cited that chart, which is the creation of Larry Michel and his now chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, Jared Bernstein, back in the early 1990s at the Economic Policy Institute, has cited that chart that's what he wants to address, the fact that it went like this and not like this.
Right.
And that is really a fundamental change from a lot of the economic assumptions of the 3 Democratic presidents who preceded him, Carter, Clinton, and Obama, because the party wasn't there yet. Well, the party's there now, and we're seeing within 1 week, we're seeing all kinds of ways in which the administration is now working hard to address that.
Okay, so that's all the good news. So now the Grim Reaper's going to come in for the last 20 minutes of this thing. So, I mean, we mentioned that these things are going to have to go through the gauntlet of the courts. And the courts are sort of firmly conservative, particularly because of the judge shopping and venue shopping that goes on that makes sure that these court cases are go through almost certainly conservative judges. And then at the end of that gauntlet, they get up to the Supreme Court. And we saw a Supreme Court case that you wrote about this week, not on a regulatory issue, although that's coming, but on the issue of Donald Trump and whether presidents have immunity from crimes committed while in office.
The court held a whole series of significant oral arguments this week on whether your right to emergency care supersedes a state's ban on abortion. I want to discuss first, just briefly, the one bad result or bad coming result for workers, because one of the less celebrated cases this week concerned the ability of the National Labor Relations Board to go to courts and get an injunction which will give a worker his or her job back if the NLRB says this worker has been illegally fired because he or she is active in unionization campaign. Conservative groups and businesses went to contesting this. In this case, it was Starbucks. Oddly enough, they're negotiating with the union on the one hand, and they're trying to weaken labor regulations on the other. They're not sure one hand knows what the other is doing. But
already paid the lawyers, so why not?
They are paying for these union busting lawyers, and the union busting lawyers, in order to justify their pay or
also it's not about Starbucks for them, it's about every other
So what they were arguing was that in essence there need to be more criteria met before judges can issue what's called a 10J injunction, which would restore this worker to his or her job. The point being that, again, the terrific appointments that the Biden administration has made at the National Labor Relations Board, particularly its general counsel, Jennifer Abruzzo, has noted that, absent this injunction, it can take years or months anyway for for workers to get their jobs back. And the practical effect of this is, since is to kill a unionization drive,
Yeah.
unless these people can be restored to their jobs in real time. In other words, it's based on the reality of what it takes to unionize for workers
I
to
mean,
gain the right to
it's like,
collective bargaining in time.
yeah,
Uh,
it's like it's bad enough
yeah,
that the only real sanction on these companies is having to pay back pay
yeah,
uh, to these workers that they fire. That's one thing. Another thing is now they can disrupt the whole unionization effort because there's this time lag between when these
exactly.
have to be restored.
So again, here you have a Biden agency, the National Labor Relations Board, being more proactively pro-worker and more proactively willing to enforce the National Labor Relations Act, and that just like the non-compete ban at the FTC gets a knee-jerk negative reaction from business. And the Supreme Court is not going to do labor any favors
And
based on
and the
this,
much
based on what the oral arguments made clear.
and the
But that was
much
just one day at the court.
Yeah, and the much bigger case, and we're going to get to the Trump
Right.
thing, the much bigger case looming in this arena is what is called Loper Bright Industries. And that case would reverse what is called Chevron deference. And Chevron deference is the way in which independent or executive branch agencies can interpret statutes. They're given the ability to do that through the Chevron ruling in the 1970s to make rules and regulations based on statutes that come to them. If Loper Bright rules in the way that I think everybody thinks it's going to rule, agencies would not be given that deference, and basically it would turn the courts into this sort of super regulator where they could say, we don't have to sort of defer to you. We can give you basically a mandate of whatever regulation we want up or down. And so that's going to be a huge impediment to the future of regulatory of the administrative state, really.
Right. And again, it also is, as you just said, a continual rise in the power of the unelected branch of government, the courts. And we, again, have seen that in different ways this week in the various oral
Yeah,
arguments.
and
And
I
of
think we
course,
should talk about the Trump case in that
yes,
context too, because they're essentially interfering not only with the judicial process, but interfering with the presidential election process.
exactly, exactly. So when Trump made his claims of immunity to get rid of the prosecution that Special Prosecutor Jack Smith was levying against him, in particular for his role in the January 6th.
This is about one of the four cases that
Yeah, yeah,
Trump.
yeah. But the most prominent one. I mean, oh, by the way, the president tried to negate the effect of the results of the 2020 presidential election. So this came first before the district court, which will hear the case. And, you think you have immunity from that? No way. Quick decision. And then it came before the DC appellate court circuit. And they said also, no, I mean, it's not a serious claim. You can't have immunity for trying to overthrow the government. And then it reached the Supremes just yesterday. Or was it?
After they
Yeah,
received this months ago, and then they
yeah,
scheduled a hearing 2 months into the future, which was this week
yeah.
for this.
Yeah, and they said, well, let's pull back and look at the whole issue of what a president can do, what a president can't do. We think this needs to go back to the district court and disaggregate what Donald Trump did as president versus what Donald Trump did as candidate versus what Donald Trump did as a schmuck, but that didn't quite say that. And the effect of this was to make it highly unlikely, to put it mildly, that this trial on this, fundamental issue, much more so than any of the other three trials of Donald Trump that for which he's been charged, make it all but impossible for this to take place before the November election. And this was sort of the judges, the six Republican judges, I should say, hiding behind the cloak of, well, let's take this as an abstract issue and see what would happen. And of course, my favorite bad guy judge, Sam Alito, was leading the charge here. Alito basically said, well, wouldn't it make a president do almost kind of desperate things if he thought he could be prosecuted for doing desperate things once he leaves office? So we shouldn't, so it's really
A remarkable circular argument saying that
it's a little
can't
like
prosecute Trump for January 6th, otherwise there will be more January 6s. It's insane.
Yeah, it's a little like saying if a guy who's killed some people then kills the witnesses to those murders, that it's the fault of the law that you can be prosecuted for murder, or the fault of the DAs who do that prosecution. It's their fault, not the fault of the murderer. And that's basically the thought process that Alito put forward. But I think the court will probably issue a statement saying, well, if when the president does things in a non-presidential capacity, he's not immune from that. But this has got to go back to the district court, who has got to parse.
I mean, I think that's the key, right? The key is the animating principle for the majority of the Supreme Court is, how can we drag this out longer?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote that, just as we designate members of Congress when us reporters write there, we have then parentheses D or parentheses R after their names. I think we have to do that with the court now. This is the most parentheses R thing we have seen since Bush v. Gore.
Well, and it's clear that that having these trials is damaging in one way or another to Trump. We're in the midst of one in Manhattan right now, where Trump has to sit there the entire day. That disrupts campaigning. He actually tried to campaign over the weekend, last weekend, and there was a storm in North Carolina. He couldn't even do that. So he hasn't been on the campaign trail. He not that he's sort of amped up the campaign. Apparently there was a day off in the trial this week and he spent it golfing rather than doing anything of value. So, but he's stuck there for weeks. These sort of damaging, we've seen this testimony, I guess, described from the guy from the National Enquirer, talking about all the ways in which he covered up various embarrassing scandals of Trump, and also made up stories about his rivals, and the National Enquirer was just like sort of this adjunct arm of the Republican Party in 2016. So yeah, it's damaging to have these trials go on, and so the idea is, let's push them out, delay. And Trump's handpicked judge, Eileen Cannon, is doing that in the document scandal. And now the Supreme Court is trying to do that in the context of the January 6th case.
Yeah, and this is the court really putting its thumb on the outcome of the November election.
Yeah.
It's
all right. So
I'll say this: should the Democrats, and this would be hard, but should the Democrats regain the Senate, hold the House, and hold the White House,
yeah.
I think the case for adding justices to the Supreme Court or putting time limits on justices' tenure will have more adherents than it has up to now. I mean, the court is being so political.
The case,
yeah,
for adding justices to the district courts.
Yeah,
which we don't hear as much about, but we wrote about it like 4 years ago, when during our day one agenda stuff, The reason that the Texas is such an attractive place for, business interests to file these cases is that in the various districts of Texas, there are sometimes only one judge or two judges, all of them appointed by Trump or appointed by Republicans. And so you know what you're getting. It's not a random draw. You know exactly the judge that you're going to get to hear that case. And if you expanded those various districts with more judges, as has been recommended by the Judicial Conference, which is sort of the governing body here, and at which the House and Senate would have every ability to do, and has done many, many times before in their past, then this judge shopping opportunity would be more limited.
Right. And Chief Justice Roberts, who is some days of the week concerned about the credibility of the court and other days of the week less so, has said that judge shopping, at least theoretically, is a problem. But, the Republican House is not about to
Right. The
create
Judicial
more.
Conference tried to fix this and
Yeah.
said, here's a new method for choosing these cases. And they got tons of Republican pushback. And then they decided it was only non-binding guidance rather than an actual policy. Okay. In the last few minutes we have left here, because I have someone unique here with me in Mr. Meyerson, Harold, you attended Columbia University. I believe you were there at or maybe just after the 1968, which had a number of campus protests that were, by the way, much more invasive than the protests that we're seeing today. They
Oh,
took
yeah.
campus buildings. They held a dean hostage, I believe, at one point.
Yes, Dean Coleman in Hamilton Hall, as I recall.
And now we're seeing, obviously, this week, one of the big stories we've seen these protests that initiated at Columbia, but have been all over the country now, here in California, at USC and UCLA as well. Given your background in being at maybe or involved in, I don't know what, these protests in the 60s, could you talk about what is happening and how you think the various university administrators are handling this?
Well, just to clarify, I was not, yeah, I was had not yet entered Columbia in the spring of '68 when a number of buildings were occupied. Dean Coleman was somewhat detained inside Hamilton Hall, and the administration called in police in what was much, it was a much bigger occupation
Right.
by the students then, and it was many more arrests then than now. Then about 700 students were arrested, and there were really some pretty severe injuries from cops clubbing people with their nightsticks. I should also add, I was also in Chicago, though, in the summer of '68 for the Democratic Convention. But we'll hold that discussion until the Democratic Convention approaches. I think taking USC as an example, which used to be the most Republican school under the sun, and then it became a much more serious, for lack of a better word, university. Part of what you're seeing is administrators being scared to death of not cracking down on students. I mean, when people wondered what started at USC was that a Palestinian American student was a valedictorian, supposed to give therefore the valedictorian speech at graduation, and the administration said, "No way you can do that." I think what the administration has in mind is you've not only got Republican elected officials, but before that you had the major donors like Bill Ackman, who are really threatening college presidents with their jobs if they let anything happen that was not kosher according to Bill Ackman.
Right.
Or
You think that's animating the response from
yeah.
the
So I think that is a lot of what's driving college presidents who probably know better in terms of suppression of these demonstrations, which, as you just said, David, are nowhere near as disruptive as those of 1968 and 69. You know, we at Columbia kind of prided ourselves for starting this. And then in 69, when Harvard and these other schools have students beginning to occupy buildings, we said, oh, yeah, copycats. You know, we were there
Right.
first, damn it.
Right.
So that's an issue.
Yeah,
And
I
of
mean, I think
course,
that's true. If you go to like the Columbia University website, you will see these kind of paeans to the past of how it was great that students were able to express themselves and conducted these demonstrations, and we're at the pulse of activism in America. And they're still on the websites, even though they're cracking down on these like tent encampments of people doing pizza parties and and
yeah.
and chanting.
I should add that there are two significant figures at the Prospect beside me who were at Columbia in the spring of
Yeah.
1968 and were covering this for the Columbia Daily Spectator. One is Paul Starr, one of our three founding editors, and still one of our two co-editors, along with Bob Kuttner. And the other is Mike Stern, who is someone who has been chairman of the Prospect Board and is still a very active and significant member of the Prospect Board, both writing about this stuff avidly in the Columbia Daily Spectator and unmasking various administration chicanery and mischief in the process.
I think you've given
So,
me a, I
in
think
a
you've given me
sense,
a
the
future
Prospect
story.
has a a history of involvement here.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm gonna have to make a phone call after this to Mike or Paul to talk about it. But anyway, well, look, we're just about out of time here. Harold Meyerson, editor at large, thank you so much for your work in our busy season here, covering all of these various developments. This will be archived. You can take a look at it afterwards. All weekend at prospect.org. And we're here every Friday at 12:30 Eastern. And we will see you next time. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.